September to 1942. Saint Nazaire, France. The wind howled against the stone walls of the convent as Sister Marie stood at the window, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where the sea met the sky in a grim, endless stretch of gray. The sounds of the port below echoed faintly. Creaking ships, the occasional shout of soldiers, the clang of metal, and with every passing hour, it seemed as though the world outside was closing in. Yet, inside the convent, there was only silence. The kind of silence that weighed down on her chest, a silence that threatened to suffocate. Sister Marie had learned long ago that silence was a companion she could never fully trust. She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly despite her best efforts to steady them. They were the hands of a nun, hands meant for prayer, for care, for comforting those in need. Yet in this war-torn France, they had become something else entirely. These hands had begun to carry something more than just the rosary and the Bible. They carried secrets, secrets that weighed as heavily as the weapons she had hidden within the walls of this convent. For months now, she had been playing a game with fate. Each day, she moved carefully, cautiously, hiding her true purpose behind the veil of her vows. The convent, a place meant for sanctuary, had become the base of an underground operation. It wasn't the kind of place where a nun should be, at least not in the eyes of those who believed in order and law. But war had blurred those lines, turned them into something unrecognizable. The world was changing, and so too was she. The French resistance had reached out to her through a single, cryptic letter. A letter that began with a simple question: "Can you help us?" At first, Marie had hesitated, torn between the life she had sworn to lead and the desperate cries for help from those fighting to free France from the grip of Nazi occupation. She had spent sleepless nights wrestling with her conscience, praying for guidance. But the answer came not through divine intervention, but through the chilling reality of the situation. She was already living in a war. How could she ignore the cries of those who were already fighting it? The decision was made. The convent, with its thick stone walls and the isolation of its location, was the perfect place to hide weapons. No one would suspect that a nun, bound by vows of peace and devotion, could be harboring explosives, pistols, or grenades. She started small, hiding pistols inside hymn books, stashing grenades beneath the altar, and tucking small packages of explosives into the cracks of the ancient stone walls. As the days passed, the weapons grew in number, and with them, the risk. But the resistance needed these weapons, and so Marie became something she had never intended to be. A soldier, though one in the shadows, her battle fought in secret, away from the public eye. Marie was no stranger to fear. It had been a part of her life long before the war had come to her doorstep. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of what might happen to those she loved. But this fear was different. This was the kind of fear that gnawed at the soul, the kind that made every small movement feel like a betrayal. Each time she hid another weapon in the convent, each time she passed it off as if it were nothing more than a book or a bundle of supplies, she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. But it wasn't just the weight of the weapons that haunted her. It was the weight of the consequences. If the Nazis discovered what she was doing, there would be no forgiveness. There would be no mercy. Her life would be forfeit, and the lives of those she was trying to protect would be lost as well. Yet, as much as fear consumed her, it was something else that kept her moving forward: resolve. Marie had always believed in the power of quiet resistance. In the past, her small acts of defiance had been limited to whispering prayers for the oppressed or secretly sharing food with the starving. But this was different. This time, her actions would have consequences that could change the course of the war, and perhaps even the future of France. And so, she moved in the shadows, her every step deliberate, her every breath controlled. But there was another problem. The convent, though hidden and remote, was not entirely safe. The Nazis had begun to tighten their grip on Saint Nazaire, sending soldiers into the surrounding villages and towns to root out any signs of resistance. Their presence was becoming more pronounced, their suspicions growing. Marie could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. Every time a soldier passed by the convent, her heart would race, her palms would sweat. What if they had already discovered the weapons? What if someone had betrayed her? She couldn't afford to let those thoughts consume her. She had a job to do, and it was far too late to turn back now. Each day, as the soldiers patrolled the streets, Marie would retreat into the shadows of the convent, slipping into the hidden rooms where she had concealed the weapons. Her movements were swift and practiced. No one could know what she was doing. She had to remain invisible, blending in with the quiet hum of daily life. The other nuns were unaware of what was going on, and she meant to keep it that way. They trusted her. They believed she was still the same woman who had arrived at the convent all those years ago, a devout, obedient servant of God. But Marie knew that the woman they saw was no longer the woman she had once been. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the weeks turned into months, the pressure continued to build. The resistance fighters had begun to use the weapons she had provided, and with each mission they completed, Marie felt a strange sense of pride that was quickly followed by guilt. She was helping them fight, but at what cost? Every life saved by the weapons she hid in the convent was another life that she could never take back. Was it worth it? Was the blood that had already been spilled worth the freedom they were fighting for? And what about her own soul? Was she damned for what she was doing? The weight of these questions hung heavy on her, but there was no time for answers. There was only the next weapon to hide, the next mission to prepare for. She worked in the dark, alone with her thoughts, feeling the loneliness of it all pressing in on her. She could no longer share her burden with anyone. No one else could know what she was doing. The risk was too great. So, she carried it alone, the weight of the world on her shoulders, knowing that every action she took could be the one that would end it all. Yet for all the fear, for all the doubt, there was something else driving her, a quiet, burning determination. Marie had always believed in the goodness of humanity, even in the darkest of times. She had chosen a life of service, of humility, because she believed that there was always something worth fighting for, even if that fight meant breaking every rule she had ever sworn to follow, even if it meant becoming something she never thought she could be. In the early hours of the morning, when the world outside was still asleep, Marie would sneak down to the basement of the convent, where the weapons were stored. There, she would kneel in silence, offering a prayer for the lives that would soon be changed by what she had done. She would pray for the men and women who would take these weapons into the heart of the conflict, for the families who would suffer because of it, and for herself, for the woman who had chosen to carry this burden, knowing full well the consequences. But as the days grew longer and the war raged on, she began to question if any of it mattered. Was this what it took to survive in a world gone mad? Was she really making a difference? Or was she simply one more casualty of the war, another broken soul lost in the chaos? And yet, with every weapon she hid, with every secret she kept, the stakes grew higher. There would be no turning back. The moment of reckoning was coming, and she could feel it in her bones. Something was going to break, either her or the world around her. But for now, she waited in silence. The silence that surrounded her, that filled the convent, the silence that threatened to drown her in its weight. And in that silence, Marie knew that her fate and the fate of those she was trying to protect hung in the balance. December 1942. Inside the convent, the air was thick with the scent of incense, dust, and the faintest trace of fear. The stone walls, once a sanctuary of peace, now seemed like a prison, cold, unyielding, and full of secrets that should not be there. Sister Marie moved silently through the dimly lit halls, her footsteps echoing off the ancient floors. The sound of her shoes was a reminder of the weight she carried, the burden she had chosen to bear in the name of resistance. Every time she walked through these halls, every time she passed by the quiet figures of her fellow nuns, she felt the same knot in her stomach, the same fear that she could no longer shake, the fear that someone might find out. The war had been raging for over 3 years, but inside the convent, time seemed to stand still. The outside world was a distant nightmare, a world that Marie could only glimpse through the narrow, barred windows. In the evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon, The only sounds that reached her ears were the occasional rumble of trucks passing by on the road outside and the clatter of boots as the Nazi soldiers marched through the village. But inside it was quiet, too quiet, and that silence had become her enemy. Over the past several months, the operation had grown in scale. The resistance had come to rely on the weapons Marie had hidden away: pistols, grenades, and explosives, each one carefully tucked into the convent's walls, buried beneath the floorboards, and hidden in plain sight. No one would ever suspect a nun of harboring such things. No one would look for weapons where they were kept, beneath the altar, inside the sacred books, inside the very walls that had once been a place of refuge and worship. But as the stakes grew higher, so did the risks. Marie's movements had become more deliberate, more calculated. She had learned to work in the dark, in the moments when no one was watching. It was a delicate dance, moving between her duties as a nun, teaching the children, attending to the sick, and praying for the souls of the fallen, and her secret work as a member of the resistance. Every moment of peace felt like a lie. Every prayer she spoke felt like a betrayal. Yet, there was no turning back now. The weapons had started small, with just a few pistols hidden in the kitchen pantry. But as the resistance's needs grew, so did the supplies. Grenades were stashed inside the sacristy, hidden within the folds of the robes, carefully wrapped in cloth and laid out in such a way that no one would ever think to look. But it wasn't just the weapons themselves that weighed on Marie's conscience. It was the sheer scale of what she was doing. Every day, she added more to the growing stockpile, each new item a reminder that she was becoming someone else, someone who lived in the shadows, someone who had become a silent participant in a war she had never wanted to be part of. But the weapons weren't the only thing Marie had to hide. There was also the risk of betrayal. In a world where trust was a rare commodity, and where even the smallest slip of the tongue could lead to a death sentence, she had to remain cautious. Every night, as the resistance fighters came and went, she would watch them closely, gauging their every word and action. She couldn't afford to let anyone suspect her, especially not the other nuns. They would never understand. They would never forgive her for what she was doing. Marie had never been a woman who sought attention, but now she could not help but feel like a spy, moving between the walls of the convent, living a double life. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone in her room, she could hear the distant sounds of the soldiers marching outside, the clinking of their boots as they patrolled the streets, the rumbling of trucks that brought more soldiers into town. The war was closing in on them, and Marie could feel it in her bones. It was only a matter of time before someone found out. But even in the midst of all the fear, there were moments when Marie felt a sense of purpose. Each time a weapon was delivered to the resistance, each time she saw the fighters use the tools she had provided them, a strange sense of pride filled her. She had become part of something larger than herself, part of a movement that was trying to reclaim their freedom from the iron grip of the Nazi regime. She had given them the means to fight back, and in doing so, she had become a warrior in her own right. Yet, despite the satisfaction she felt in her work, there was always the nagging doubt in the back of her mind. Was this the right thing to do? Was it worth it? She had taken an oath to serve God, to live a life of peace and devotion. And yet, here she was harboring weapons that could destroy lives, weapons that could kill. Each night, as she lay in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, she questioned whether her actions were justified. Could a life of faith coexist with the violence she had chosen to be a part of? One cold December evening, as she was walking through the hallways of the convent, she overheard a conversation between two soldiers outside. Their voices were muffled, but their words were clear enough for Marie to understand. They spoke of raids, of searching for the resistance. They spoke of the convent. Marie's heart skipped a beat. She froze in her tracks, pressing herself against the cold stone wall, praying that they wouldn't hear her. Her mind raced as the soldiers' footsteps grew louder, closer. She didn't know if they had already discovered the weapons, or if they were simply patrolling the area. Either way, the fact that they were talking about the convent meant one thing: the danger was real. She had to act fast. The weapons needed to be hidden, all of them, before it was too late. With quick, practiced movements, she made her way to the basement. The air was damp, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air as she descended the narrow staircase. She reached the hidden room where the crates of weapons were stored. Her hands moved quickly, lifting crates and shifting bundles of supplies, burying them deeper into the cracks of the walls. She moved faster than ever before, her pulse racing with fear and urgency. Every second counted. Outside, the soldiers' voices were growing fainter, but Marie couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. She had to finish. She had to make sure everything was hidden, every last weapon stashed away where no one would find them. If she failed now, the consequences would be devastating. Not just for her, but for the men and women who depended on her. As the minutes passed, her hands grew clammy with sweat, but she kept working. The fear gnawed at her, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't allow herself to stop. The sound of the soldiers' boots faded completely, but still she worked. She had to be thorough. She had to make sure that no trace of what she was doing remained. Finally, when every last weapon was concealed, she took a deep breath and stood back. The room was silent now, and the weight of her actions hung heavy in the air. She felt as though she had been holding her breath for hours. Slowly, she made her way back up the stairs, her movements deliberate and calm. The danger had passed for now, but Marie knew better than to think it would stay that way. The war was closing in, and with every passing day, the chances of getting caught grew higher. But there was no going back now. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. July 1944. Saint Nazaire, France. The oppressive summer heat clung to the walls of the convent, thickening the air until each breath felt like an act of resistance. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the crumbling stone of the monastery. Inside, the silence was heavy, too heavy. Sister Marie moved through the convent, her mind distracted, her steps slower than usual. There was an unease in the air, something she could no longer ignore. She had felt it building for weeks. The tightening of the noose, the creeping realization that time was running out. The walls that had protected her, that had shielded her from the consequences of her actions, were closing in.